everyone. This legislature is called into session. Last night we had recessed, and I'd like to recap what took place yesterday. That there was when Bill 20 was brought up, the question of germaneness was presented to the body, and with our parliamentarian and legal counsel, and in reviewing, of course, the standing rules and Mason's rules, that a decision was made based on several rulings by Mason's rules and the standing rules, and not necessarily it being a biased decision. A vote was taken, and the vote at the time was 7-7 and 1 excused absence. So we had proceeded then with the agenda, only then to then be in the middle of second reading, to then appeal the decision of the chair that it was non-germane, and it was based on the vote by the body. And because a member had returned, then an appeal was made again to challenge the ruling of the chair. And for those of you, like I said earlier, know that decisions made by the chair is always based on rules. And rather than to keep the body later than usual last night, I had recess until this morning at 9 o'clock. It's now 10. I had requested, of course, of the mover that we continue to proceed with the 2 bills that were left on the agenda, and that I would then, at the time, which I normally do, at the end of exhausting all bills on the agenda, is to allow for a move to go back to motions. But clearly, that is not the intent of the mover. And if we cannot, in this House, this body of legislators, cannot have any rules of decorum or any respect for any rules, then we are really a sad body of legislators. I have nothing to prove to anybody here other than to just follow the rules and go on the advice of the body. And yes, you can always overrule the chair by a vote of 8. But what you're doing is you're overruling the rules that we've adopted. And we pass laws and rules to govern ourselves. And if we can't even govern ourselves in here, then we have no business even passing legislations. And I will make one more appeal out of respect for those right now who have 2 bills on the agenda, is to allow them to bring their bills on the floor, deliberated on the floor. Then I will allow the majority leader, as I always do, to bring us back to motions. And that's all I was asking last night, without having to continue to go back to the rules again. Because I don't want to go through this whole challenge after challenge after challenge, notwithstanding the House rules. Because then this Mason's rules will not mean anything. And the last thing in this Mason's rule that I can even pull out, and I'll read it so everyone will know on page 308, section 461, when an appeal has been decided and the subject matter of the appeal disposed of, it is too late to move to reconsider the vote on the appeal. That was going to be my ruling today. But because I made the appeal last night, that to allow the two members to finish their bills, that I would allow then us to go back to motions. Therefore, starting the whole process again. So it's up to this body. Because we can't be using jungle rules in this legislature. And if I may continue, I would like to continue by asking and recognizing Senator Morrison to proceed with his bill.
Point of order, Madam Speaker.
State your point of order.
Thank you very much, Madam Speaker, and good morning. I certainly appreciate your recollection of what happened yesterday, but I think there's a fundamental flaw in the thinking where you think the appeal comes from the chair as opposed to the appeal coming from the body. We've never disposed of my motion to overrule the decision of the chair. Granted, I made a motion to reconsider the actions of the body, and that motion was notwithstanding, fully recognizing that when we're in the second reading file, we've done it before. It's a notwithstanding motion to add additional bills on the second reading if some members feel that those bills are companion legislation and should be addressed simultaneously, or if they feel the timing is right, or even if the timing is not right, Madam Speaker, we've allowed those bills to be set aside. And so you've overruled me, and yesterday I've said whatever decision you can reconcile in your mind, even your decision, Madam Speaker, where you said that the substitute bill is non-germane, that substitute bill went through an entire series of a second public hearing. It was publicly announced. Then you ruled that the title was insufficient as per the prerogative of the chairman on rules. And I, at the time and now, I believe the title is sufficient. And if you're questioning the mover of the bill's intent to say that he was trying to hide things from the public, the media knew, Madam Speaker, the public knew, and that's why on the public hearing on the substitute Bill 20, those who are opposed to this kind of thinking or this kind of quote-unquote movement to, in whatever motives they want to question, their testimony reflected that. We heard from the Committee to Keep Guam Good. We've heard from the Archdiocese. We've heard from those forces, Madam Speaker, and so I don't think the title misled anyone. And so I accepted your ruling that the thing was non-germane, knowing that in a deliberative body, in a parliamentary body, we always have the opportunity, as the Masons rules provide, to reconsider. And so when the vote was taken, you know, it was 7-7, it was one vote shy. There was one member, granted her excuse was absence. She indicated her wanting to participate in this deliberative process. When you talked about the 5-minute rule, we had some members get up and argue, well, you're going to suppress my right to debate, you're going to suppress my opportunity to participate, and then yet that's what we're trying to do. Madam Speaker, I as chairman on rules, I want to say that right now, based on your ruling and your actions, we're operating under the guise of jungle rules, and I'm asking that we instill some order to our own standing rules, recognizing consistently what we've done with that notwithstanding provision. On your own bills, Madam Speaker, you've allowed for the funding sources to be changed. And so when you look at substitute Bill 20 versus the original bill, it's the same intent. It's just the funding mechanisms have been changed. And so if you want to take some time to review what we've done in the past, where in other instances, funding sources were changed, but yet those bills were brought to the floor. In some instances, we want a committee of the whole for an appropriation, but yet in another bill that required an appropriation, there was no requirement of a committee of the whole. And so, I'm just trying to understand where the rationale is with respect to how you believe we're being consistent. And in those areas where we're not being consistent, Madam Speaker, that's when the notwithstanding provision comes through. And, we're a parliamentary body where, as you pointed out, it's 8 votes. And the fact that you're not accepting my appeal to overrule your decision and to have a reconsideration on your decision on germaneness, I don't understand how you can say the appeal has been exhausted. The appeal has not been exhausted, Madam Speaker, because my appeal was not accepted. And so last night, you just proceeded to recognize the sponsor of another bill when you procedurally and correctly recognized me to make a notwithstanding motion that we reconsider the action. And so if we have the 8 votes, then we re-vote on your decision. I'm prepared to explain articulately and intelligently why I believe the body should reconsider your ruling on the issue of germaneness. And so to give that opportunity to members of this body to be able to discuss this matter rationally, Madam Speaker. And although off camera we presented our arguments, I thought that a degree of reasonableness will prevail. But it just seems like no matter what the rules say, and notwithstanding what the rules say and how we have been using the notwithstanding provision, recognizing that we're going outside of Masons to allow for these things to occur, that's why we have that notwithstanding provision. And so, Madam Speaker, I appeal to your better judgment. I appeal to your ability to continue to keep this group, this legislative body together. And I appeal to your fundamental belief that if there's conflict between the chair and the body, you let the body decide. If you recall, when we had to painfully go through that entire process where in the previous legislature, there was a special election that allowed a change in the majority, and where the majority at the time believed that although the standing rules said 10 votes to change the offices, the argument was made that if it took 8 votes to adopt the standing rules, then it can take 8 votes to make those changes. And so we went 6 weeks back and forth, and the presiding officer did not want to accept any of our motions at the time, and we had to resort to providing for a temporary presiding officer, because the presiding officer's role, Madam Speaker, is to simply preside. And I commend your ability to do that, but I just ask that you not say things like we're doing jungle rules and we're not following the rules and we're being inconsistent. And so I rise to not only a point of personal privilege, but an opportunity to protect the integrity of this legislature and the process and how we've been able to do things, recognizing the rules that are before us. And in those instances where we want to waive the standing rules, those motions to waive the standing rules were appropriately made. And so that's what I'm saying to you, Madam Speaker, is you can't say that we've exhausted the appeal because you did not accept my appeal, and that's where I believe we stand. And so before you recognize Senator Morrison on Bill 87 as substituted, I'm again respectfully recognizing that you recognize my appeal to overrule the actions of the chair, and that's where we have to be at this point, Madam Speaker. And I thank you for the opportunity to have this dialogue with you, and I again appeal to your better judgment. Thank you.
Speaker Pangilinan, you recognize.
Thank you very much, Madam Speaker. My Speaker, I just rise to a point of order also. According to Masons, and just for the benefit of the body, who may make a motion to reconsider? It is common practice to provide that by rule, that a motion to reconsider can only be made by a member who voted on the prevailing side of the question. This is so frequently provided by rule that it is sometimes supposed to be a rule of parliamentary procedure. where it is required by rule that a motion can be made only by a member who voted on prevailing side. The purpose of the rule is to regularly be defeated by a member of the minority voting on the prevailing side or changing that member's vote on that side in order to qualify the member to move to reconsider. In any vote except a roll call vote, it's impossible to determine how a member voted. So even the appeal to, the motion to appeal, according to the rules, really should be made by those who prevailed in the appeal. So in the appeal to overrule the speaker, it is those, when that failed, it would be the other side. So it would be somebody, again, I think it's self-explanatory, Madam Speaker, on that rule. It's Rule 464. Or, yeah, 464. Different pages. 464 is the rule number.
Is it a section?
Page 312.
So it's section 464. Who may move to reconsider? For those of you who have the same book as I do, is in page 310. Well, you see, that's exactly what we were discussing last night. Is that if you're going to use notwithstanding, then you don't need rules. Exactly. And all I'm asking in this case is the same thing, is that we proceed with the last two bills, and yes, the majority leader, and the chair has to work very closely together, and the majority leader always worked with the chair to be able to move things, and we've always agreed on when this would happen until yesterday. Senator Tom Adams.
Madam Speaker, I think a key point that the retiring speaker had mentioned was that I guess the prerogative of asking for reconsideration must come from a member of the prevailing side. If I recall last night, wasn't it a 7-7 vote, and there was one member absent? So which one was the prevailing side? I mean, aside from the fact that it defaults when the vote comes out to 7-7, then it automatically defaults to no. But there was 7 yeas and 7 no's. So which one was the prevailing side?
No, the side that failed to get 8 votes to overrule the speaker is the prevailing side.
Yeah. This side, the prevailing, was the person who yes. Mr. Vice Speaker, you had your hand up. Oh. Yes, Senator.
Just to add to the discussion then, Madam Speaker, on for those who have the same Mason's book that you have on page 310, line item 3, Luther Cushing in his Law and Practice of Legislative Assemblies, where there is no official rule on the subject, a motion to reconsider may be made by any member precisely like any other motion and subject to no other rule. I just wanted to add that in the discussion because I'm just as confused, and I'm going to admit that for the record.
Yeah, but in this case, there is a special rule. There are rules. Senator Dueñas.
Yeah, Madam Speaker, I provide an opinion, or at least as a member of this body, agreeing with the good retiring speaker from Barrigada, that the prevailing side is the side to which, when the motion was made, it was sustained because the other side didn't prevail. Now, Madam Speaker, I really agree with you when you discuss the fact that if we just constantly use a notwithstanding motion, then we'll never have rules. This would be an infinity session. Because if any member of this body from here on going forward can gather 8 votes just to constantly say, I don't like that, I don't like what happened with that bill, then that's not the majority of the body, Madam Speaker. That's just a complete abuse of that term as far as I'm concerned, Madam Speaker. So I agree with your ruling with regard to that. And also, Madam Speaker, in closing on this point, the reason for the vote, regardless of who of us are excused, the reason why the vote prevails when the vote is taken, I think every member in this body has been absent at least at one point in time for a vote. That happened to an individual that recently lost nomination that probably would have won had votes been here. So my point, Madam Speaker, is that that vote is sacred when it's taken. That vote stands. I could have said Henry Taitano should be confirmed right now because I was in Washington, but I'm going to vote for him. So, Madam Speaker, I think that when we do what you're saying, play by the rules, those are the rules.
Senator San Nicolas, you recognize.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Madam Speaker, this whole thing is just extremely disturbing to me, extremely disturbing. Our rules, whether Masons or standing, are not supposed to be constraining the will of the majority body of this legislature. We are not supposed to be procedurally tying ourselves into knots so that we cannot function. This is an embarrassment. And the reason why we have notwithstanding provisions that we've always been honoring in every session up until this day is because at the end of the day, in a democracy, whether representative or popular, the majority rules. Not what's in a book or adopted. In a democracy, the majority rules. And the rules are not supposed to be designed to constrain the will of the majority. I've been kind of quiet on this whole thing, trying to hope that this thing resolves itself, but Madam Speaker, if there are those among us who are not part of the majority on any motion, we should be ashamed of trying to derail the democratic process, democracy, by trying to use procedures to hogtie the will of the people, the majority. If there is no majority, Madam Speaker, then the motion will fail. So let's bring an end to this and restore the integrity of this House.
Is there anybody else who would like to add? Senator Yamashita.
Good morning, Madam Speaker. Madam Speaker, as the member who had to leave and take care of her son, I want to say, I am saying that I wish that I was here. I wish that I was able to participate. And as we have, in the practice, in the short practice that I've been here, reconsidered actions and brought issues back to the table, whether it be in the form of a new bill number, in an extra public hearing, in another day, we have done that. We have. I respect you, I respect your leadership, and you have always been fair. But as the voice who, my fault, I had to take care of Eric, but I came back under an hour. And things moved so quickly when they didn't, the 90 minutes that I was here, that we spent on one override item or two, and then all of a sudden things just zipped, and I came back as quickly as I could. And so I just want, for the record, want to say, as the voice that was absent, and it's been quoted all over the media now that she was gone, and whatever insinuations the reporters are trying to make from that statement, I want you to know, Madam Speaker, that I've always wanted to speak on this measure, as I always do, for measures that I have been spoken with, spoken about, and committed to. So my voice is not silent right now. Thank you.
You're welcome. Senator McCready.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I'd just like to recite on the Mason's Manual, page 311, section 465, number 4. Parliamentary law does not restrict the making of the motion to reconsider to a member who voted on the prevailing side of a question sought to be reconsidered.
Is there anybody else? The gist that I'm getting is that it doesn't matter whether we have Mason's rules or standing rules, so long as we can use the notwithstanding
No,
rule,
point of-
and only if there is no majority. At least that's what I'm hearing.
Point of order.
And
Sorry,
state
Madam.
your point of
Thank you
order.
very much, ma'am. I think what Senator McCready pointed out is that although one rule says it's common practice on section 464, on the same section, it says parliamentary law does not restrict the making of the motion to reconsider to a member who voted on the prevailing side of a question sought to be reconsidered. And so although I made a notwithstanding motion, if it brings comfort to our members, I put this before you to issue your perspective, Madam Speaker, on what this rule actually says. The first rule, as the Speaker from Barrigada pointed out, saying it's common practice to provide by rule that a motion to reconsider can be made only by a member who voted on the prevailing side of the question. And then on the same section, it says parliamentary law does not restrict the making of the motion to reconsider to a member who voted on the prevailing side of a question sought to be reconsidered. So again, the spirit of Masons reflect that every single member of a parliamentary body has the right to make those motions that are consistent with the rules. And if those motions are wanting to waive a particular section of the rule, then that's where the notwithstanding provision comes in. And so I think fundamentally, Madam Speaker, again, there's been an appeal to reconsider the action of the body, and you've made that ruling that my motion was not in order at the time. And so my next motion I'm trying to put before the body through your acceptance is that we overruled the decision of the chair, and that's where the resistance comes from. And I think when there's a clear recognition of the will of the majority, and yet the chair and several members are suppressing that will, that's when we ought to be extremely concerned with the kind of rules that we're not following right now. Thank you, Madam Speaker.
I think it's important for me to reiterate, if I may, is that at the time that this was made, of course, was right in the middle of second reading. And I've never stopped anybody from waiving the House rules. It's where we were on the agenda is where I wanted us to remain on the agenda, to finish, like I said, Bill 87 and 19. Then if you want to waive the House rules to go back to motions, that will be granted. Then the motion after that, procedurally, if the motion is to place Bill 20, if the motion is to reconsider the vote and appeal it at that time, then that's the time. I'm just trying to set exactly and speak at where we were and where we are, and not to stifle any debate. And out of respect, of course, to everyone here to have their bills heard, deliberated, and including Bill 20. I'm not taking a position on Bill 20. I'm taking a position as to where we are on the agenda. And out of respect to two members here also, who haven't been given the opportunity to place their bills and deliberate on it. We're not going anywhere. When someone made the comment, we need to be here next week, we'll be here next week. And I'm appealing to the body that where we are on the agenda, I would like for us to continue. I'm not going to call recess after we're done with Bill 19. We will continue, and I will recognize you, the Majority Leader, to make your motions to waive the House rules. What more public commitment can I give you before we vote?
Madam Speaker, can I just have a minute recess?
We'll take a brief recess.
Madam Speaker?
Yes, Senator Respicio.
Thank you very much, Madam Speaker. Madam Speaker, I rise to publicly recognize your degree of reasonableness, and having stated that after we'll dispose of the two bills on the agenda, that if it's the will of the body at that time to go back to motions, then that would be more appropriate to place any other matter that is eligible for consideration on the session agenda, and we would just take this one step at a time. So again, I accept your offer, Madam Speaker, and thank you again for your degree of reasonableness.
Thank you very much, Senator Respicio.
So I withdraw my motion to overrule the decision of the chair in a reconsideration.
Thank you. And we will proceed on the second reading file. I'd like to recognize the author, Senator Morrison, on Bill number 87-32.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I move to place Bill 87 as substituted by the Committee on Aviation, Ground Transportation, Regulatory Concerns, and Future Generations into the third reading file, and I'd like to speak on it.
Yes, you may proceed, Senator.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. First off, I'd like to thank my colleague, Senator St. Nicholas, and his staff, my staff, for working on a very extensive committee report. I believe it ended up worth 1,100 pages, so I appreciate the help. Madam Speaker, Bill 87 is relative to implementing a limited helmet law. Madam Speaker, a lot of good information came out of that public hearing. It was very productive from our motorcycle community, and I sincerely appreciate those who participated that shared their stories on how a helmet saved their life. Bill 87 addresses many of their concerns, and it addresses age with experience. It would also make it mandatory for any driver under the age of 21 and passenger to use a helmet. In addition, Madam Speaker, any driver who has not been licensed to operate a motorcycle for at least 3 years to wear a safety helmet. It also provides for a valid certificate of completion of a motorcycle safety defensive driving course for new drivers, and I say new riders. It would also prohibit a licensee from operating a motorcycle on public roads with an engine larger than the engine in the motorcycle for which he or she used to take the road exam. And these licensees will also have to qualify to operate a larger motorcycle if that be. Madam Speaker, this is a concern that was raised by the motorcycling community, also raised by my colleagues, that there is an issue where a lot of those who take the road test use a smaller size engine from possible a 50 cc to take the road test and then come out the next day with a larger engine size than what they could operate. And that poses a real safety concern that these individuals may not know how to operate a larger motorcycle bike. So that addresses that issue. Madam Speaker, Bill 87 was never intended to attack our motorcycle community. We understand full well the contributions of this community and how much it's given back to our children, our charitable organizations out there, escorting our veterans, doing funerals. I also want to make it clear, Madam Speaker, Bill 87 was not designed to infringe on the freedoms of anybody's rights. 25 high courts and the United States Supreme Court have also affirmed this, that helmet laws are constitutional. Bill 87 is clearly designed to minimize or stop the bleeding in our community, especially from our motorcycle community on our roadways. Just yesterday, Madam Speaker, there was a motorcycle accident right out in Naganya, right across the shopping center. GPD statistics also warrant a helmet. From 2008 to 2009, or 2012, Madam Speaker, there was 11 fatalities. 9 of those fatalities weren't using a helmet. From 2008 to 2012, there were 239 motorcycle accidents with major injuries. Out of 239, Madam Speaker, there were over 186 that weren't helmeted. These are very alarming numbers, Madam Speaker. There are many contributing factors. I know at the public hearing there was statements made that helmets are not going to save lives. Helmets won't do this. Helmets won't do that. Of course, it's not a contributing factor to accidents. But one thing, Madam Speaker, is helmets are a contributing factor to safety. The CDC reports, the National Highway Safety has also made it clear that you would have a 40% chance with a helmet at impact from major brain injuries. It also reports that you will also have to a 60% chance from major injuries. Now, I also stated even those reports are way off. When we strike out 40%, I think to even say 20% you have a chance of opportunity from major injuries is something that is still alarming for us to address. Madam Speaker, again, I commend the motorcycle community for their input and helping provide some really serious concerns. We worked with the motorcycle community. I worked with my colleagues. I appreciate the testimonies and their concerns as well. And this is not about one person or one group. This is about the entire community. And it's really our duty, Madam Speaker, to do whatever it takes with these very alarming numbers to address them in a proper manner. I believe a limited, although it's a compromise, sometimes the all or nothing approach doesn't always work, but I believe, Madam Speaker, that it is a fair compromise for the safety of our community. And it's a start. And I thank you, Madam Speaker, for this opportunity.
You're welcome, Senator. And just for the listening audience, and he did announce it, that there are over 500 pages, and it's on the website. And that if anyone is interested in getting a copy, of course, is that a CD will be provided. And I'd like to thank MIS for getting this voluminous committee report on our website. On the motion, Senator McCready.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I rise in full support of substitute bill number 87, and I commend the author. I commend the author for listening to the constituents at the public hearing, and when it was brought up that if they would have any objections to a 21 and under law, nobody in the room actually had an opinion or had a negative opinion towards it. And people kind of looked around the room like shaking their head like maybe that's a good compromise. So I want to thank the author for having the compromise and allowing for his bill to be or allowing himself to amend his own bill. And I fully support the 21 years and under for the driver and the passenger, and the 3-year grace period where a new licensee would then have to wear a helmet in that interim period before they were able to make a decision of to wearing a helmet or not. So I thank you for this bill. I thank the author for this bill, and I ask my colleagues to do the same. Thank you.
You're welcome, Senator. On the motion, Senator Dueñas.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Good morning. Madam Speaker, I rise in full support of the substitute version of Bill 87, and I commend the author and the co-sponsors for their tenacity and braveness. Particularly two sponsors on this bill, co-sponsors, Madam Speaker, that the mover of this motion, who introduced this bill, I want to say this because I know there was a lot of public perception that my good friend and colleague was reacting to a very emotional and very dear issue within his life. And I say that although I know that that was a consideration, I know that that was not the primary reason. The reason why I say, Madam Speaker, that the two other co-sponsors here, and I mentioned that in their willingness to be brave once again and join this effort, was the good sponsor of this legislation I know personally watched all of the hearings on the last effort to do this. And as we know, and as members know, it was an encore performance, rightly so, by the good folks out there in the motorcycle community, of which I am a part of as well. One of my brothers also that's very dear to me that doesn't wear his helmet. But we've had that conversation, and he's been riding for way more than 3 years. But Madam Speaker, I say that because I met with him after that, and some of the emails and some of the public debate and discourse on this legislation was quite heavy and quite heated. And I admire him, a freshman senator, to show that kind of grit and tenacity, to not only watch those proceedings, but then move forward and endure a second round. Madam Speaker, I have to say that during the second round, and I think that even the good author and many members, it was quite a packed house, even amongst the senators that joined to hear testimony. I gotta say that even from the author's perspective, and maybe he'll mention this in his closing, that there was a change. It seemed to be a little bit more, a little less raucous, and a little bit more really specifically on the points. And everybody was extremely articulate in their points on both sides, to include those who, thankfully, they're still alive, because one of them who wore a helmet but still was a heavy victim, and one who didn't, who fortunately is still here as well. And then, of course, you heard from the rest of the biking community, absolutely rightly so, in terms of their position of freedom and choice. And I understand that part as well, Madam Speaker. You know, living in a democracy that those are the freedoms we enjoy. So, Madam Speaker, I commend the author for enduring that, for listening. And although I know deep in his heart he believes that it should have stayed in its original version, he used his wisdom and he used his better sense to say, we're going to start here. And I'll close with this, Madam Speaker. We had a conversation, because we talk quite often. We had a conversation where, before there were a lot of push for privatization in the government, and there was a lot of pushback, because there's a great argument on both sides. And then years went by, and some positions softened, and there was public-private partnerships, which is a good way to go. And we see that now, to where it's a balanced perspective from the public. I believe that that's what this legislation is now, Madam Speaker. Who knows? Someday, in the good senator's third, fourth, fifth term, there may be a time, that there's a recognition. It's just everybody. But for now, I think he's been extremely reasonable, very sensitive, exercised what, this body is and should be all about: reasonable discourse and understanding at the end of the day, what's best and what can be accomplished. And as my good friend from Barrigada said a couple times with his bills, I'll rather get something. So, Madam Speaker, in that vein, I think it's extremely reasonable, and I believe this will still save lives. And it plays to the better sense of those who have experience to make that choice. Just like when you go swimming when you're a kid, your mom put those things on your arms so you would float. Now you jump in there because you can swim. And that's up to you whether you're going to wear a life jacket or not. And so, Madam Speaker, I think that this is an excellent compromise, but it's still, I believe, going to go a long way in saving lives and making bikers more aware and our roads safer. So, Madam Speaker, thank you for the opportunity to rise in full support, and once again to commend the author on his very reasonable approach to Bill 87. Situs Masi.
Vice Speaker, you're recognized.
Thank you very much, Madam Speaker, for giving me this opportunity to speak on Bill 87-32. Madam Speaker, I rise in full support of this substituted version of this bill. And I really, really sincerely want to commend the author and the committee chair and their staff for working through this substituted version. As you know, I made an initial attempt at this in the last term. Because of family matters, I was not on island, and my good co-sponsor, Senator Barnes, had to suffer the hearing by herself without me, and took considerable heat for it. When I returned, I unfortunately was not as mature as the author of this bill to have made the decision that I will take the recommendations that were made at the hearing and do the substitute. I just ignored the bill and let it die. So I really commend the author for his maturity in recognizing what was said and in listening to the testimony that was provided. I mean, the hearing was even allowed to where There was questioning by the senators of members of the audience asking, would you accept this as a possible compromise? It was almost a town hall meeting. And all that is in this bill, Madam Speaker, as limited as it is, was everything that had and was suggested by those that came to testify against the bill of universal helmet, but for limited use. They were the ones that recommended the course. They were the ones that recommended that maybe under the age of 21 or 18 that you might want to do, want to have that provision. They were the ones that suggested that the licenses be restricted to the license that you took your motorcycle test with. And my hat really goes off to the committee and especially the author for being willing to have suffered that hearing and then coming out of it a bigger man and making the decision, I'm still going to try to protect as many lives as I can, and I'm going to take the recommendations that were given to me, and in a bill 1/3, 1/20th the size of the initial bill, still do something about trying to protect lives. So I rise in full support and again extend my commendations and congratulations to the excellent way in which the author of this bill moved forward with this. He has my newfound respect for the way that he handled himself, and I'm really proud that I'm a fourth or fifth co-sponsor in this, but really truly he should have the full commendation and recognition for the hard efforts that he made in doing this. And I was roundly criticized by the people that at this last hearing, because they said, we gave you all this stuff and you just ignored it. And it's true. I'm embarrassed that I did. But this young man took the criticism, took the recommendation, and has come out with an excellent bill. And I stand in full support of it and of him.
On the motion, Senator Uggan.
Thank you very much, Madam Speaker, and good morning to you and to our fellow colleagues. You know, Madam Speaker, when you take a look at legislation that is introduced that to some extent presents controversy or questions, or some sectors of our community are going to be directly impacted, to see that the sponsor of this legislation step forward and recognize the comments that were provided during the public hearing is certainly gratifying in terms of being a member of this body. Only because the biking community came out in droves during the course of the public hearing. I'd like to extend not only the chairman of the committee for conducting that particular public hearing and making it accessible to the public to the greatest extent possible, but also for the bike riders and those who were non-bike riders who accompanied their other half on bikes. That would mean they're also bike riders? Okay, non-bike drivers, so to speak. But you know, Madam Speaker, in that case, they also came forward and they provided testimony, and they provided some very excellent suggestions. One was the safety course. Perhaps a safety course should be instituted so that anyone that is acquiring a driver's license for the first time should go through that entire process. What we have before us in the substituted version of Bill number 87 is a semblance of that requirement in terms of ensuring that there is a defensive driving and driver safety course required and imposed following after January 1st, 2015. Also, Madam Speaker, one of the suggestions that was proffered during the course of the conversation was perhaps you can look at initial riders being required to be able to not only take the driver course, but perhaps be required to wear a helmet, just for the initial timeline in which their license, after they expires for the first acquisition of that driver's license or motorcycle license. And that too is reflected in here. I know that one of our colleagues, the previous speakers, had asked individuals on the panel if the age requirement was lifted to 21, would you still endorse that concept? I know one individual at that panel, on that panel, had some reservations, but really, it wasn't to the extent where they were consistently adamant towards that particular idea. And that's what this legislation does, Madam Speaker. It provides for anyone under the age of 21 that they be required to wear a helmet, and that anyone with the initial driver acquisition of a motorcycle license would have to wear a helmet for the first 3 years, or the term of that particular license. And looking at this, Madam Speaker, what exactly is the intent behind this? It goes back to what the sponsor highlighted. Not only safety on the road, but possibly saving lives. And certainly, looking at it from that perspective, saving lives, the proposed amended version, is that much better. I want to just share just one particular observation, Madam Speaker. You know, when this the legislation was initially introduced, there were perhaps 2 or 3 separate occasions where, in fact, I was able to observe groups of bike riders riding to our island or to our communities. And I noticed that 70 to 80% of all the bike riders, at least the observation that I was able to see, were all wearing helmets. Because it was a personal preference at that time, or as the law stands today. Also, Madam Speaker, one of the very avid motorcyclists on our island mentioned at the public hearing that because it was nighttime, and because he understands the dangers associated with riding in the evenings, that he, even after his testimony, said he was going to wear his helmet home. Because traditionally he wears his helmet in the evenings. So even that avid motorcyclist who was against the imposition or the restriction or the requirement that all motorcyclists and drivers wear helmets did observe a certain level of safety in terms of utilizing the helmet. So you look at those and you listen to the testimonials during the course of the public hearing, Madam Speaker. The riders wanted to retain their discretion in terms of making those decisions. But I also observed that there are also many riders out there who, based on their personal discretion, still use helmets when they see it's necessary, when they see it's appropriate, whether it's because of wet road conditions or whether it's in the evening. So I look at this legislation, Madam Speaker, and I commend the sponsor as well as the committee that helped facilitate compiling the report, because it really reflects comments that were shared with the sponsor of this legislation, with the committee, as well as with members of this body during the course of the public hearing. And that's what this whole policy making process is all about. It's listening to our people. If we have legislation, and if in fact it's going to ultimately accomplish the objective that the sponsor was proposing in this case, and I believe it will. It will save lives, and it will encourage people, more individuals, to not only take a safety course, but also in conjunction with that, ensure that anyone on the age of 21 and under, that they be required to wear a helmet. So I stand in full support of this particular measure. Thank you very much, Madam.
You're welcome, Senator. On the motion, Senator Limtiaco.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Madam Speaker, I just want to take the opportunity to commend the author of the bill for being very brave to go through the last public hearing regarding this bill and to watch the type of scrutiny that he would be under and to still forge forward and introduce it. I'm proud that I'm a member of the freshman senators and to have Senator Morrison as a colleague. Madam Speaker, I've been riding motorcycles since I was 8 years old. I turned professional and raced professional motocross from the age of 16 to 18. But I never got on a street bike until I was 22 after I graduated from college. And I never did because I knew how dangerous riding a motorcycle on the street was. No matter what you wear, whether it's a helmet or full protective body armor, you are always going to lose the battle between the road, any fixed object, and more importantly, another vehicle. So no matter how much experience you have, you just never know when you're riding a motorcycle, because you have to take into consideration everybody else around you. You need to ride as though everybody is out to hurt you. And when Senator Morrison first approached me in the original author of the bill, I threw him under the bus, for a lack of a better analogy. I threw him under the bus because I said I will not support the bill unless you put in a safety course. Because no matter what you wear, if the individuals are not trained properly on how to operate a vehicle, how to avoid or at least anticipate the likelihood of an accident, no helmet, no protective gear is going to protect that motorcyclist. But Senator Morrison, he didn't listen to me, so he got thrown under the bus. When the public hearing happened, he thought twice about it, as well as the committee, and they came out with a bill which I think is much better than the original authored version, and I commend him for listening at the public hearing, because he said the same exact thing. We heard from experienced motorcyclists who have done this for better part of their life, and they understand themselves the risk they're taking. No amount of protective gear is going to help you unless you understand and at least can anticipate the danger that you're putting yourself the minute you drive out of your garage or your carport. And I commend the author for doing that. Now, I'm a firm believer in choice, and I said that at the public hearing as well. However, I think that this bill strikes a balance between that choice of educated motorcyclists making the choice and going through at least 3 years of experience. And once again, 3 years of experience is not a lot, especially if you're not riding your bike every day. 3 years of experience is nothing. If you take your bike out every weekend, just think about it. You're taking it out 52 times or so every year. That's not a lot, especially when you're only riding it 1 to 2 hours during that weekend ride. However, I think it's the right balance. And like the retiring speakers had mentioned, not only did Senator Morrison and the committee listen to those that offered testimony at the public hearing, but even the retiring speaker before that had reiterated that it's essential that what the bills that are generated that come out of the public hearing fully incorporate the testimony that was provided at the public hearing. And if I could just take an opportunity to amend the bill in such a fashion that I think it would benefit. And it was just in reviewing the bill that I noticed that although the bill cites that passengers under the age of 21 shall also wear a helmet, I recall a couple of weeks ago driving into work and noticing that there was this child, this son of, I would assume it's the son of this motorcyclist. This child couldn't have been more than 5 years old, clinging to the back of the motorcyclist. And I thought, yeah, he was wearing a helmet though. The child was wearing a helmet, and so was the driver of the vehicle. But what position is that child able to anticipate a potential crash? Or is he just going to fly off the back of that bike like a backpack? And if I could, I'd like to amend the bill on page 1, ending at line 10, to add a new sentence in there that says that no passenger under the age of 15 shall be permitted to ride as a passenger. Or excuse me, no passenger under the age of 15 shall be permitted on a motorcycle.
I'm sorry, can you give me the page?
Page 1, line
Page
10.
1, line 10. it,
Right after the sentence ending a bicycle equipped with a motor.
okay.
And the reason why I chose the age of 15, I believe that at the age of 15 you are permitted to get a permit, a learner's permit. And if I'm not correct, if anybody in the body could help me just confirm that, what I'm trying to do is let that age be such that it's the age that is allowed for the first receipt of a permit. It may be 15 or 16. 15? 15 years and 9 months. So 15 years and 9 months, such that that person can still be allowed to get a permit.
Can you repeat again the amendment? No.
No passenger, no person,
Person or passenger?
yeah.
We'll take a brief recess.
Okay, thank you.
Legislature is back in session. Senator Lim Tiaku, you still have the floor on an amendment.
Thank you, Madam Speaker, for the short recess in order to refine the amendment. And Madam Speaker, if we could just dispense with a smaller amendment first. On page 1, line 9, I'd like to add in the word scooter after when riding on a motorcycle, comma, the word scooter should be inserted.
Okay.
Scooter or moped.
Or moped.
And then the sentence will proceed with including a bicycle equipped with a motor.
Okay, so that's not the other amendment that you...
That's an additional amendment, Madam Speaker.
Yeah.
Okay. I'd like to just make it all part of
Make it all
one
at
main
time.
amendment.
So then, when riding a motorcycle, scooter, or moped, including a bicycle equipped with a motor, no person under the age of 15 years and 9 months.
Actually, it will read no passenger under the age of 12
The age of 12
shall be permitted as a passenger on a motorcycle, scooter, or moped, or bicycle equipped with a motor.
Okay. All right then. So on the amendment, no objections, so ordered. Just make sure that the clerks have a copy of the amendment.
Will do, Madam Speaker. Madam Speaker, also, in speaking with the sponsor prior to the original bill, I advised him that there are certain international standards as it relates to helmet standards and helmet certifications. Department of Transportation, which is often referred to as the DOT, is definitely one of the standards, but there are also higher rated standards and international standards that are referred to as SNELL, SNELL. And so I'd like to proffer the amendment just to be consistent. Although the author does recognize on page 1 that meets or exceeds the safety standards established by the United States Department of Transportation, on page 2, under section 3305.1, it just as a technical amendment, Madam Speaker, it should reflect the same language, and and this section only says requirements established by the Department of Transportation. So just as a technical amendment to be consistent with 3305, that it repeat the language that meets or exceeds the safety standards established by the Department of Transportation.
Well, in the front it says United States Department of Transportation, and then page 2 it just says Department of Transportation. So are you going to make that the same, the United States Department of Transportation?
Yes, Madam Speaker, I believe that was the intent of the author.
Okay, so on line 7 is to put back the words United States, then you continue United States Department of Transportation. Okay, on that amendment without any objections ordered. And what were you going to do is now?
No, what that does, Madam Speaker, is that it actually allows for the SNELL standard, which is an international standard which is higher than the Department of Transportation standards.
Okay, so but there won't be any reference
No,
to it.
I think the language allows for it.
Okay, is there any other?
Madam Speaker, I have no further amendments, and I'd just like to say that I believe that this bill, as substituted by the committee, represents a compromise, and it allows for 3 things. It allows for the safety course, which is going to be the basis as to which will truly define what the intent of this bill attempts to do, which is save lives. Because once again, we reiterate, and what we heard at the public hearing and the testimony provided is that no matter how much safety gear you wear, if you violate the traffic laws of Guam, if you speed, it doesn't matter how much gear you're wearing. If you crash into it, whether you're wearing a helmet or not, you will suffer severe injury. And this bill, as substituted by committee, addresses that and truly is the heart of the bill, the safety training, in order to provide for these individual operators to have the necessary skills in order to anticipate and ride defensively in anticipation of any type of danger that could come their way, knowing that they will lose any battle that they encounter with either a vehicle or a fixed object. It clarifies the fact that Department of Revenue and Taxation does not approve helmets, and that language was stricken from the original bill, and recognizes the Department of Transportation or any other standard that exceeds the safety standards established by Department of Transportation. And it strikes the right balance between having the choice to wear a helmet and not wear a helmet by allowing for those that at least have 3 years of experience, have gone through the safety course, and sets an age limit on when that person can make a decision. So although I'm in favor of the choice to put a helmet on or to not put a helmet on, I would support this bill because it strikes at least a fair compromise on allowing for the education of the operators, and at that point in time where they have received the necessary training and riding experience, that they then can make a choice, and they're free to make a choice. And 3 years is not that long, especially if you're only riding your bike, your motorcycle on the weekends. But at least they go through the safety course, they have some experience, and then they can make an informed decision. Thank you, Madam Speaker.
Welcome, Senator. On the motion, Senator Tom Adat.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I rise in support of the bill, and I think it does address, the substituted bill certainly addresses a lot of the concerns that were raised during the public hearing. I do have a couple of, however, I do have a couple of concerns, and I hope that we can address it here. One is on page 1, of course, is the basically the mandate that anybody under the age of 21, well, those who have to wear safety helmets are those who are under the age of 21, and those who have less than 3 years of motorcycle driving experience, regardless of age. And so certainly with the latter, about the 3 years of experience, I think that certainly there's no argument with that. I do have a concern, though, about the change in the age requirement, in that you have anybody under the age of 21. Now, you know, if we go back and think about when legislation was being considered about increasing the drinking age from the age of 18 to the age of 21, the opponents of that sort of measure basically came back and said, hey, you know, if I'm responsible enough to sign up and go fight for my country, I should be responsible enough to handle my drinking. But then subsequently, the arguments would come back, and the arguments then to support increasing the drinking age from 18 to 21 was more so based on the issue of the developmental stage of one's brain system, I guess, or whatever, the physiological maturity and development of a person. And I think when those arguments were being proffered, certainly the passage of the increase in the drinking age from 18 to 21 had fared a lot better. Now, this idea about increasing then the age of having to wear a helmet for anyone under 21 then kind of takes me back to the question of, you know, if I'm responsible enough to be able to sign up and go fight for my country, then why are you now saying that? I suppose increasing it to 21 suggests that that individual, that motorcycle rider under the age of 21, is not responsible enough, and so we want to kind of protect him by putting a helmet on him. During the public hearing, a lot of the opponents, of course, of the helmet bill, as you would see, are veterans, you know, and they basically make their argument. I go over there and I put my life on the line, and now you're going to come back and I can't even exercise this freedom of being able to ride without a helmet. And so, you know, be kind of the same argument of, you know, you get a young man who goes to the Middle East and he fights the war and he comes back at the age of 19 or 20, and but you know he can't exercise that freedom of choice to be able to ride without a helmet, provided that he meets the other requirements as stipulated here in the law. Take, for example, somebody like the retiring speaker from Tamuning, who started riding at the age of 8. And so probably by the age of 16, he already had a driver's license. He was probably about as well equipped to ride out there. But again, for some reason, we've got this thing about, you know, maybe we could say that at the age of 16, he was still kind of irresponsible, because as evidenced by the fact that if he wanted to join the military, he has to get his parents' permission. If he wanted, he probably couldn't go to the bank and get a credit card. And so, you know, but at the age of 18, you're responsible enough to register to vote. You're responsible enough to go sign up for the military and go fight for your country. You're responsible to go and get a loan, provided you have a job. So I don't understand the correlation between, you know, the 18 and now taking it up to 21. Granted, the way the bill is structured, if at the age of 18 the individual is for the first time being licensed, then he's going to be required by the law to wear that helmet until he has had 3 years of driving experience and has undergone, of course, the driver's testing. So I'm just not clear on, you know, why is it that we're increasing that age to the age of 21 to have to wear a helmet. And so, Madam Speaker, I would like to make a sincere attempt to make that amendment on lines 5 and 6 on page 1, and really take that restriction and roll it back to the age of 18. So those under the age of 18 who are licensed or who are passengers on the motorcycle, they have to wear a helmet. But after the age of 18, then give them that freedom of choice, provided that they have met all the other requirements of the law. The 3 years of driving experience, as of course won't be able to get a license until they have gone through a safety course. You know, so I move that the age requirement for the wearing of a safety helmet be reverted back to the age of 18 instead of 21. So the amendment then is to change on line 5 and on line 6 the 21 years back to 18 years of age.
On the amendment, Senator Morrison, you recognize.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I appreciate my colleagues' clear thoughts about age requirements, and we were also trying to mirror the issue, the concerns of maturity as well. And I know the concerns he brought up regarding when they're raising the age from 18 to 21 was clearly more on the impacts of what alcohol contributes to the brain, or the impacts it has. My understanding too, Madam Speaker, is under the age of 21, insurance companies, I believe it's about almost 3 times higher for an individual. So clearly, the insurance companies also understand clearly the risk involved of insuring those under 21. The goal, Madam Speaker, of the age increase was also to address the maturity, also to keep these individuals under the age of 21 much more longer in helmets. Our goal here is to hopefully see that these kids, or these children, I call them young adults, will hopefully see that these helmets are not a novelty. They're not a novelty, that they're there to protect you. And they hope that it will be part of their safety gear. I know responsibility, we can always measure that in many ways. But clearly the attempt here was to allow for those individuals under those age of 21 to stay longer in these helmets. And I was hoping that the mindset would change over time, that these helmets are not a novelty. So, Madam Speaker, I respectfully object to the amendment being proffered. Thank you.
On the amendment, Senator Yamashita.
Thank you very much, Madam Speaker. On the amendment, Madam Speaker, the author of this measure knows exactly where I stood when he first approached me about it. And I too went to the public hearing and I listened, and I too have thought about all the other aspects in our community where we've addressed how to protect our growing citizens, our growing people as they developed. And so 16, 18, 21, 25 is a construct that we look at. In this particular case, Madam Speaker, I agree with the mover of the amendment, in that 18 is when our men and women go and fight for us. And maybe if we said you have to be 21 before you can go and fight and defend us and sacrifice and uphold our democracy, then maybe I'll be open to saying, well, you can't have a beer until you're 21. You can't decide whether or not to put the helmet on your head until you can't have children until you're 21. You can't get married until you're 21. Can't get a job until you're 21. And that is getting ridiculous, because we know that's not really. The point is, what is the best safety standard for our people? And I understand the author of this overall measure, Bill number 87, simply wants to ensure that our drivers are safe, that our people are safe, and that we have less accidents. But I've always believed that 18 wasn't the magic indicator there. And I also suggest that in the unfortunate incidents, even in this last couple of months, it wasn't the people under 21 who were being harmed on motorcycle accidents. There were our older people, and some of them were wearing helmets and some weren't. So it is too, that whole safety issue is exactly what one of our other senators said from Tamuning, and that was, it's about road conditions, it's about lighting, it's about safety. It's about everything put together. So this particular amendment, Madam Speaker, the notion that for me, 18 is reasonable. And mostly because, and we know that an overwhelming majority of our people on our island join the service, and they do go off and protect. We've just had 600 go, and they will be coming back. We have 16,000 veterans who have served. And at 18, most of them will wear a helmet. We heard that at the public hearing. They do. But for me, it's that choice issue. So I look forward to the continued deliberation. Thank you very much, Madam Speaker.
You're welcome. On the motion, on the amendment, rather, Senator Ada's amendment, Senator McCready.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I certainly understand the mover of the amendment and the retiring speaker on the reasoning behind it. But I would like to yield a question to the mover of the amendment. And what would, there's obviously a difference between 18 and 21. So my question would be, do we have any numbers on how much it would cost an 18-year-old to insure himself as to opposed to a 21-year-old? And I think that there should be a cost difference. I don't know how significant that an 18-year-old would pay as opposed to a 21-year-old. So I mean, there's costs associated with making with capping it at 18 years old. So I just wanted to know if we
Senator Ada,
put
do
that
you
into
yield to the
consideration.
question?
Madam Speaker, I don't have that particular information. I do know that, for example, just from experience, certainly an individual under the age of 25 trying to get insurance for an automobile, 4 wheels, certainly a person under 25, it's a lot more expensive to insure that individual than somebody over the age of 25. So I imagine that would apply also for a motorcycle. But my point here is I think the bill has done much, much more in trying to make for a safe rider by requiring the safety driver course, by requiring the use of a helmet if you have less than 3 years of experience, by, I forget what else we've done here, by requiring that the license or that they are not able to operate a motorcycle larger than what they tested with. And I think those are the measures that was necessary to try and get a more a motorcyclist who would be able to operate more safely out there on the streets. But this issue about age, you know, requiring them up until they're 21 to use now is an issue that I think is starting to impinge upon the freedom of choice of that motorcyclist who may have met all these requirements already. Certainly the gentleman from Tamuning who started riding since he was 8 years old would have met all those requirements. Yet, you know, he has to wear that helmet for an additional 3 years because somehow or other we just said 21 is the magic number. And I'm saying the age of 18 would be based on the fact that, you know, that is the age that we have established in our community as the age when you can register to vote, you can go out and you can get kicked out of your house and go fend for yourself because you supposedly would have graduated from high school and be able to go and get a job. So at least that's the linkage that I have to the age requirement versus, you know, the age of 21. I mean, heck, for that matter, that individual probably until he reaches the age of 26 will still have a higher insurance rate than at the age of 21. So that's basically the basis for my arguing for the age of 18. Thank you.
There is a registered objection, so all in favor of the Ada amendment, please raise your hand. Oh, okay, because I had allowed him, he was closing, but I'll allow you then to speak.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Madam Speaker, once again, as I iterated in the main motion, the heart of the bill is the safety training course. And like I reiterated regarding the 3 years experience, this bill still allows for someone to go out and get their motorcycle license and never ride for the next 3 years, but the fact that he has his motorcycle license means he has 3 years experience, even though he never got on his bike. The fact that he had his license means that he's got 3 years experience. That's what this bill allows for. So once again, the heart of the bill is at the safety training course. Whether you take it at the age of 18 or you take it at the age of 21, you need to take it. Thank you, Madam Speaker.
So there is an objection. I'm going to call for the vote. All in favor of the added amendment, please raise your hand. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. The amendment carries. Centrata, you still have the floor? Okay. Senator Munya Barnes on the motion.
Madam Speaker, I just have a point of inquiry, and I don't know if I can have the good author of the legislation or my colleague who proffered an amendment earlier, and I'm just asking because I think we had an amendment that was passed in reference to nobody under the age of 12 can ride a motorcycle.
Yes.
Was that amendment?
Yes, it passed.
Okay, my concern is,
Not about the amendment now because
no,
it already had
my
passed.
concern, a previous amendment,
Okay.
my concern is that as we develop riders, we have children here on Guam who start riding motorcycles or electronic motorized vehicles starting at the age of 5. And they've been competing competitively for many years. And as the CCs of the motorized vehicles, there's different, I guess, different sections or different divisions of these of these motorized machines, and it goes up 25 cc, 30, 40, 50, 60, and there was an amendment was proffered. So if I can just have a minute break, because I want to make sure that those folks who ride motorcycles are not those kids that ride motorcycles, that they won't be stopped from doing what they've loved, because motorcycle riding is a sport also. So I just want to bring it up for the record. It just hit me as the retiring speaker was speaking or on the last amendment. Thanks. Yes?
It passed. It says no passenger under the age of 12. Passenger. The amendment says passenger, carrying them on as.
Thank you, Madam
but
Speaker. I
not as
just
a
wanted
rider.
to ask that as a point of clarification, because I want to make sure that we don't stop any young motorcycle riders.
So what, you still need a recess?
Yeah, can I have a
Okay,
30-second
take a brief
recess, please?
recess. Senator Munya Barnes, you still have the
Thank you,
floor.
Madam Speaker. My question was answered. I just wanted to make sure that there was no unintended consequences that will occur based on an amendment that was proffered earlier. So, thank you.
Is there anybody else who would like to speak on the main motion? One second. I have 2 amendments, but I do not have a name on it, so I wouldn't know who to recognize. Oh, okay, that's for you. All right. Speaker Pangilinan then on the motion, main motion.
Thank you very much, Madam Speaker. Madam Speaker, I stand not sure where I am with regards to this bill, but I certainly do. One thing I am sure of is that I think I do want to commend the author for his efforts and his approach to trying to resolve the concerns raised by members of our community that are going to be affected by this. Both that feel there's going to be a positive effect and even those that feel that the bill as introduced was going to be overbearing and intrusive on their freedom of choice and their right to make a decision for themselves. And I, for one, have always been leaning to the side of people know what they want and they make choices and they live with those choices. And as long as those choices, to the greatest degree possible, does not infringe on the rights of other individuals within our community, then those choices shouldn't be infringed upon. But there are also community concerns and community standards that we want to provide for our citizens. That's why we have laws. We have laws to protect the community from behavior that is negative to members of our other community. And the question, of course, that comes up with the introduction of this bill is a law that allows a person to make a decision on whether or not he's going to wear a helmet have really any negative impact on the community except for that individual and his family? And I'm not sure that it does. I'm not sure that putting a helmet on a person or requiring him to wear a helmet or allowing him to make that decision not to wear one has any impact other than to himself and his family should something unfortunate happen to him. You know, Madam Speaker, I also ride a motorcycle, and I've had, you know, a couple of fairly serious crashes in a motorcycle. The first time I decided to challenge a 1969 Mustang, and I won. I'm still here. But boy, was it scary. And at that time, I was not wearing a helmet. Another time, I decided to challenge the curve up at Sinahanya Mobile and the curb there, and it won. Got a big hole in my knee. Came within centimeters of the curb there as I crashed, and I was sliding with the bike, and I could literally see the curb coming to my face. It came so close to my face. There was no impact, but I scratched my face, and you could see the scratch, but no gash. That's how close I was. And I don't know what would have happened if I was not able to sustain my head and be above that curb and above that pavement. I know if I'd hit it, I don't think I would have won. But that was a decision I made. Had I been a better rider, I might not have been in those situations. And I was fortunate, and I thank the good Lord for my fortune in those instances, as I continue to thank Him for my fortune in all the other instances and challenges that He has placed me in. The fact that I'm still here. I don't know how much longer, but I'm still here. I think that the approach that has been taken by the author in this really does, in my opinion, strike an imbalance that is still very positive and still takes into consideration the rights of individuals, but provides a framework that I think that individual, when he makes that decision, is going to be better prepared to deal with that decision and the consequences of that decision. He's going to be better prepared to handle what would happen if something should come before him as he's riding his motorcycle. I for one, I don't know what, you know, I go back and forth. Some days I'd wear one, a helmet, other days I won't. I try to be as careful as I can because I always think it's going to be the other guy that's going to be at fault and not me. And I'd ride as if that's the way it's going to be out there. That I don't have to worry about myself, I have to worry about the other person. And I think that the defensive driving course is going to prepare those individuals that make that decision to be able to have some better preparation to deal with it. There was discussion earlier, of course, of 18 to 21, as the good author, the good senator from Manila talked about the discussion on making that decision of at which point, 21 or 18 even for drinking. We took a look at many of the issues regarding that, and for me at that time, it was really what were the scientific facts with regards to brain development and alcohol's impact on that brain development, not only by the time between 18 and 21, but what is exposure to alcohol and then continued consumption of alcohol beyond 21, how does that affect a person's life and so forth? And is it negative or positive? I think an earlier exposure to alcohol and consumption to alcohol affects a person later on in life. And it is those things that we're trying to provide, as one word that was used here, the maturity to deal with that. And for alcohol, not only the maturity, but the scientific development of the brain that occurs beyond 21. Some people get smarter beyond 21, others stop. And so, Madam Speaker, I voted on the original bill. I was in this body when we decided to give people freedom of choice. And I think that this bill does not deprive them of that freedom of choice. I think they will have an opportunity to exercise that freedom of choice given a time frame that allows them to be better prepared for that choice. My other colleague mentioned about what it takes to be able to handle a motorcycle, and that, 1 weekend a month or 1 day a weekend in a week, 1 day every weekend to ride a bike just doesn't, over 3 years is not a long time. He's absolutely correct, and he's more and more qualified to say that, having a greater extension of riding motorcycles. I have many friends who ride off-road and would never ride on the road because they just think it's too dangerous, even though they are excellent riders in off-road motorbikes because of the danger. So, again, Madam Speaker, I really am, a little bit torn in ratcheting back freedom of choice, but I think in this case, I really think it provides that opportunity at a time when the individuals, having gone through the defensive driving course, haven't had the opportunity over a 3-year time frame to get more familiar with the roads and the road conditions and dealing with traffic and all the other drivers out there that may not be on, have no concern about the motorcycle rider and is not being careful, that motorcycle rider out there will have that opportunity to experience the roadways and the discourteous drivers and those that do not care about you, and give him an opportunity to deal with those kind of situations, so that at a time when he makes the decision and he has the ability and the right to ride without a helmet, that he will be in a better position and in a safer position to deal with that. So once again, Madam Speaker, I do want to commend the author. I think it is the approach and the ability to deal with all of the strong positions and strong opinions and expressions of those opinions in coming up with something like this is to be commended. And I understand that it is not exactly what we want, but it is and will be an act that will improve safety on the roads for those individuals riding motorcycles without undue infringement and total denial of the right to make a decision for themselves when they meet the terms and conditions and requirements under this law. So thank you, and Sudasmasi, Madam Speaker.
You're welcome. Is there anybody else who would like to speak? Senator San Nicolas.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I too rise in support of the substituted version of this bill. And I also wanted to share my colleagues' commendations of the author. It takes a great maturity from a lawmaker's perspective to be willing to put forward an idea, go through all of the necessary motions to refine the idea, and then to be willing to thereafter move forward a bill that's quite different from your original intention, but takes into consideration a lot of the opinions that were shared by all those who participated. So Senator Morrison has demonstrated great lawmaker maturity in his handling of this issue, and I believe that it's in order to commend him for that. I also wanted to recognize, Madam Speaker, all the participants who contributed to this bill, particularly those who participated in the public hearing. We had individuals who suffered from motorcycle accidents, who provided very strong testimony in favor of helmets. We also had a lot of the members of the motorcycle community come forward and share their concerns as well, and it was all very civil, very well-mannered, very considerate, and it was a moment of deep pride for me and for our community in their ability to, as passionate as they were about the issue, come forward and share their perspectives in a very, very civilized and considerate manner. And all of that has resulted in what we have before us today, which I believe is a very fair and balanced approach that partially, in a limited fashion, addresses the helmet concerns, but also takes into consideration the suggestions, the very valid suggestions that we do need to train our riders more, and we do need to be more stringent on how we license riders with respect to the motorcycles that they are actually using. And again, it's a very, very balanced approach, a very mature approach. I commend the author and I rise in support of the bill. Thank you, Madam Speaker.
You're welcome. On the motion, Senator Morrison, would you like to close?
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Before I close, I have two amendments that I circulated with the body. I'm not sure, does everybody have?
Yes, I have a copy.
Madam Speaker, the First Amendment proposes to allow for the outsourcing of these road exams. It mirrors the operator of the road exams as it exists today. So I'm going to add a new section 7 at the end of the bill. And it would read a new item P, is added to section 3101 of 16 GCA to read as follows. Motorcycle road skills tests shall be administered by the Division of Motor Vehicles of the Department of Revenue and Taxation, or by up to 5 years examining entities who have been approved by the Department of Revenue and Taxation through the established rules and regulations to certify the competence of prospective licensees to operate a vehicle on Guam's roads and highways. Examining entities, examiners that are qualified, unapproved, and authorized to conduct road exams pursuant to subsection 31A05. This chapter are further authorized to conduct motorcycle road skill tests, provided that 1. The examiner conducting the test has had a valid motorcycle license for a period of not less than 5 years, and 2. The road course used for the examination has been approved by the Department of Revenue and Taxation. Again, Madam Speaker, this mirrors the operator of the road exams, and it allows for outsourcing of these road exams. And as you can see in the current substituted bill, it allows up to, I believe, up to January 2015 to get these examinations in place and to be implemented by that period. So hopefully by this amendment, Madam Speaker, it will allow hopefully to expedite that process and get these examination and safety courses in place. Thank you, Madam Speaker.
On the amendment, no objections? Senator Limchiaco.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Madam Speaker, just as a point of inquiry, if the author would yield to a question, I'm concerned that the road skills testing examination is being limited to 5 examining entities. And I just want to understand the rationale behind limiting it, because it would make more sense that you let the market determine the demand and the supply of these entities. Limiting it to 5 may create some sort of captive market on this, when really we should just leave it to the private sector to determine the supply and demand of how many of these individuals are looking for these testing businesses, and whether or not these businesses should fairly compete for a good quality product, a good quality price, and provides the necessary competition in the fair market to determine what level of businesses will be supported by it.
Senator, do you yield to the question?
Yes, Madam Speaker. I thank my colleague for that question. I believe it was specific for 5 years so that they have that experience. But Madam Speaker, I have no objection to the concerns of the.
It's not the 5 years, it's the 5 examining entities.
Can I recess, Madam Speaker?
Okay, take a brief recess. in session. Senator Lim Tiaco, you have the floor.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Madam Speaker, thank you for the short recess. The author of the amendment has clarified that the reason why we have a limitation on the number of examining entities is because Revenue Tax currently doesn't have the resources to properly audit and manage these examining entities. And at such time, I'll go ahead. So basically, my request for inquiry has been answered, and I have nothing further. Thank you, Madam Speaker.
Welcome, Senator. On the motion, on the amendment, Senator Yamashita. No, okay. So on the Morrison amendment, no objections? Senator Ada, no objections on the Morrison? Yes, Section 7.
No, Madam Speaker, but I would like to make an amendment to this amendment.
Okay.
And my amendment would be to add after the last sentence there, to add to the last sentence there, language that would read, organizations engaged in the sale of motorcycles, comma, scooters/mopeds, comma, including bicycles equipped with a motor, which is language that's earlier on in the bill, shall be ineligible to be considered, shall be ineligible to be designated as examining entities. So in other words, then the Harley-Davidson shop, they can meet all the requirements of the rules and regulations, but because they are engaged in the sale, that certainly would be a conflict of interest. And so they would not be eligible to be designated as an examining entity.
And you'd like to have that at the end of the entire amendment?
On the last line, after Department of
taxation?
Revenue and Tax, period, it would then read,
Okay.
organizations engaged in the sale of motorcycles, comma, scooters/mopeds, and comma, including a bicycle equipped with a motor, comma, shall be ineligible to be
Designated
testing
as
or examining
entities.
entities.
Okay. On the ADA amendment, no objections? Discussion? No objections?
Madam
Senator
Speaker,
Lim Tiaco?
I just want to confirm that we included a scooter and/or moped, as we did in the further amendments.
He mentioned. Yes.
Okay,
yes.
thank you, Madam Speaker, because we made that amendment in the
Yes.
early. Okay, thank you.
Okay, and the clerk has that. So on the ADA amendment, no objections, so ordered. Senator Morrison, you have another amendment.
Yes, thank you, Madam Speaker. The second amendment is to create standards for the motorcycle safety on line 2, line 16 after the term 2015, to add the standards for such motorcycle safety / defensive driving education course shall be determined by the Department of Revenue and Taxation and approved and promulgated by the department director.
On the amendment? No objections to the amendment? So ordered. Senator Morrison, you still have the floor.
Yes. Thank you, Madam Speaker. I really want to thank my colleagues for their kind words. Even though one of my colleagues said he threw me under the bus, but at least we came out under the bus together and we found a way forward to ensure the safety of our community through this measure. Madam Speaker, there's many organizations, proponents of safety organizations, that have made it very clear that helmets are one safety item there that can help prevent or minimize the impact to our motorcyclists or motorcycle riders. What we didn't also make clear, Madam Speaker, is the impacts. I know the retiring speaker, or Speaker Pangilinan, made it very clear about some of the impacts to society Madam Speaker, I saw exactly what those impacts are to society firsthand, from the point of injury all the way to our first responders, to our medics, our nurses, our doctors, and I saw the impacts. There's a lot of people involved to save an individual's life. So clearly, Madam Speaker, there is an impact to society, and whatever we can do, Madam Speaker, with the data in front of us that's clear, that is very alarming, to minimize those impacts is really, for lack of a better term, putting a helmet on this person. And that's what we're doing here. I commended the individuals, the motorcycle community, for respecting the federal guidelines, our federal or military installations. And you know the list of safety gear they need to wear. For many decades, they have respected those requirements. They know deep down in their hearts that those gears are put in place to protect and minimize their injuries. Bill 87 is simply asking for just a little bit. A safety gear, a helmet. I know, Madam Speaker, I came in with an all-in or approach, or all or nothing approach to this, but I appreciate the wisdom of this body. I thank my colleagues. The ideas they shared, and how we could put this measure forward. I clearly watched all the previous hearings. I looked at the past previous committee reports. Those have a lot to do with this measure today. So the work of the previous bodies or legislatures, I commend them for that effort as well. It may not happen then, but we got something today that we know very well will begin the movement for those to wear helmets and save their lives. Madam Speaker, as one of the great motorcycle companies stated out there, Harley Davidson, he clearly states helmets are not a novelty, and to always, and I repeat, always wear one. Always wear one. And I also wanted to make it clear to the motorcycle community that I'm not doing this to infringe on their rights. It's the first thing I did is to make sure I wasn't going down that path. But I commend them for still working with me and having that openness and dialogue to look at where I was coming from and what other states were doing. We're closely joining 20 other states in this measure. We're halfway there. It's not a universal helmet law, but we're halfway there. So, Madam Speaker, I thank my colleagues once again for their help. And before I close, Madam Speaker, I'd like to make an amendment to include Senator Brant McCready as a co-sponsor, Senator Limtiaco, Senator Tom Matta, Senator Frank Ogden as co-sponsors. So I think I have 8 now. I always try to well,
On that amendment then, to include McCready, Limchaco, Tomada, and Agan as co-sponsors without any objection, so ordered.
okay, thank you, Madam Speaker.
So on the motion to place 87-32 to the third reading file without any objection, so ordered. We're going to take a lunch break and be back at 2 this afternoon. So we're going to recess for lunch.